But the one who destroyed the masajid and the churches, they don't need to be de-radicalized. The ones who committed genocide in the name of religion, they don't need to be de-radicalized. But the Muslims, they have to be de-radicalized. And it has to be, normally when we think about signs of Allah's creation, what do we think about? Normally, it's mountains, it's sea, it's grass, green pastures, fruit, vegetables, things like that, right? But here Allah actually says, of my signs are your colors. Of my signs are your languages. SubhanAllah, amazing, isn't it, if you reflect on it for a minute? The fact that a human being can speak so many different languages, isn't that an amazing thing? So brothers, as the speakers have mentioned, definitely the issue of Sudan has not been in the media or discussed amongst the Ummah in the same way that Palestine has been discussed. In fact, I feel Palestine is probably a point of contention for the whole Ummah that wakes them up from their slumber. I don't think any other cause, whether it's within the Arab world or outside the Arab world, for the Muslim Ummah, even for humanity actually, even if you look at the global marches for Palestine in the UK, in the US, in Canada, and Italy, and beyond, in Spain, nothing seems to move the world like Palestine. But then we have to ask ourselves, what are we using as a yardstick, or how are we measuring our response to these crises? And I was asked to just talk about Palestine briefly. And as we know, currently Gaza is apparently in a ceasefire that has resulted in the murder of 419 people as of yesterday. The last one was a 13-year-old girl who was sniped by an Israeli soldier yesterday, and over 1,000 wounded. All the promises of food have not been delivered. All the promises of safety are not in place, so they're blowing up houses, and they're still ensuring that the people of Gaza have no respite whatsoever. But really, brothers, this comes down to the events that led up to the ceasefire. Because many of you would have seen this so-called peace plan that Trump talked about. Really, there's nothing more further than a peace plan than what Trump suggested for Gaza. What they really want to do is achieve what they couldn't achieve through military force by these measures. So what they're trying to do is come up with a plan to occupy Gaza, essentially. So I call it the colonial plan. If you really look at the substance here, they talk about de-radicalization. They feel that the people of Gaza need to be de-radicalized. These are the same people where Muslims and Christians have lived for centuries with no issues. But the one who destroyed the masajid and the churches, they don't need to be de-radicalized. The ones who committed genocide in the name of religion, they don't need to be de-radicalized. But the Muslims, they have to be de-radicalized, and they have to be disarmed. The ones who carried out the genocide with the blessing and support of the world, they can keep their arms. And in fact, they will supply them with more to commit these crimes against humanity. In fact, just a few days ago, I wrote an article about 2 of the people that were murdered in Gaza during this genocide. Obviously, about 100,000 have been murdered at least. But these were 2 Christian women, a mum and her daughter. And they were in their church. They were seeking shelter in this church. And an Israeli sniper mowed them both down. That is the reality of genocide in Gaza. What you'll see when you look at Palestine, and when you look at the issues that affect the people there, and the issues affecting the people of Sudan, they come down to the same colonial roots. So this map here, as you can see, is of Blad Sham mainly, but also Iraq, and even part of the Hijaz. So if you look at the map, you will see these straight lines. Why are there straight lines? If you look at a map of Europe, just go and look at a map of Europe after, you'll see it's all jagged lines around rivers and around natural coastlines, around mountain ranges. But with us, they've literally put the map on a piece of paper and then just drawn lines, the Sykes-Picot Agreement of the Middle East. And this all happened after World War I, or during World War I. But brothers, I've got a question to ask, and I want as many people to engage, please. Why is Sudan forgotten? Why is it forgotten? Why does it not get the attention that Gaza and Palestine gets? But I'm not going to move on until I get engagement.
Maybe because the Zionists, they control the media.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I saw another hand somewhere.
Yeah, I was going to say social media attention.
Okay.
Racism.
Racism. Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say Black Lives Matter.
Okay.
As a Muslim, also, stuff I love it is there is an element in the Muslim, especially in the Arab world, of Arab superiority.
Okay.
So there's a focus more on Al-Ghazza, Al-Iraq, and then, for example, what happened with Rohingya, Kashmir, they don't, even though that's been going on longer, you can see the Middle East gets more coverage. In my humble opinion, I think there's some element of Arab superiority.
Okay. Any more? By the way, I'm really pleased that people just came out and said these things, because we can beat around the bush, but actually I think a lot of them are very true. And the brother mentioned that. I think social media attention, I think, is a really crucial one, personally, because you have to remember people get moved when they see things. That's just a reality. But I think there is underlying racism, definitely. I think there is a hierarchy within our own communities. I'm sure many of you have heard racist terms in your families. I'm sorry to say it. Unless you're going to lie to me and say no one says, you know, colour in a way. I know they say it, because I've seen it in the Arab world and I have to correct them. I have to say, no, we don't speak like that, we're Muslims. We don't have, you know, this one's white and this one's Arab and this one's black. This is unacceptable in Islam. And in fact, it goes against one of the most amazing ayat in the Quran. For me, this ayah should be as part of the teaching of Aqidah. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَمِنْ آيَاتِهِ خَلْقِ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ وَإِخْتِلَافِ أَلْسِنَتِكُمْ وَأَلْوَانِكُمْ إِنَّ فِي ذَلِكَ آيَاتٍ لِلْعَالَمِينَ. That verily in the creations of the heavens and the earth and the differences of your skin colours and languages are signs for people of knowledge. That's amazing, because normally when we think about signs of Allah's creation, what do we think about? Normally it's mountains, it's sea, it's grass, green pastures, fruit, vegetables, things like that, right? But here Allah actually says, of my signs are your colours, of my signs are your languages. SubhanAllah, amazing, isn't it, if you reflect on it for a minute? But we hear people speaking another language and say, oh, that language sounds a bit funny. I've heard it. I've heard Arabs say that about Asian languages, but that's their language. That's your language. It's a blessing. The fact that the human being can speak so many different languages, isn't that an amazing thing? That someone can go between Arabic to Bengali to English to Urdu. Amazing. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us that ability. I don't know if anyone's seen this guy called Yuji, I think his name is, on social media. He goes, I guess I can speak your language. I don't know if anyone's seen him. He's from Kazakhstan. And it's really interesting because this man has obviously been able to learn dozens, if not hundreds, of languages. The same tongue can actually utter those languages. And the fact that our colours should be a blessing, white, you know, Asian, black, but we actually treat it as a source of division. So I do believe all of those points are correct. There is an element of racism. I think there is one issue that I think is really important to understand: social media, and the brother mentioned it. The mainstream media does not prioritize our affairs. So even Gaza would not have been in people's attention if it was not for the live stream genocide. The fact that people took those images and videos and shared them. Because people, out of sight, out of mind. I think that concept does exist, unfortunately. But we do need to address in our communities this concept of racism and superiority, as the brother mentioned. Now, in terms of Sudan and its history, my talk, I was given a bit of a brief to talk about the history, so I might be repeating myself a little bit, but I'll try and make it a little bit different, inshallah. But we know that the land of Egypt initially was opened up under the time of Omer bin al-As. He was the general who opened it. And I was actually in Egypt for the Global March to Gaza recently, and I went to the Masjid of Omer bin al-As. And actually it's really interesting. You think about the development of this land, Egypt under Islam. They were some of the first to build hospitals, for example, libraries. We know the great Al-Azhar Institute, and all of these great developments under Islamic rule. And subhanAllah, when I was at this masjid, I saw the worst of our current affairs, the worst of our situation as an ummah. Whereas as soon as I walked into the masjid, the begging that was going on was something out of this world. I mean, I said to the brother, where can I make wudu? He directs me and he goes, like this, and I said, no, brother, what do you mean? You just told me where to go and pray to make wudu. This is not something to charge for. Then another brother showed me something where Imam al-Shafi'i writes something on a pillar. And he goes, do you want to give me money for that? I said, this is completely against the hospitality and the etiquette of the masjid. And then as I'm leaving, a police officer puts his arm around me and says, do you want to make a donation to me? I was like, this is not believable. So I did a video directly outside there. And I said, this is the problem of our ummah. We've lost this concept of dignity. This should be part of the responsibility of looking after your guest, a visitor. This is not appropriate to be begging in a masjid at every time, at every move you make. Wallahi, this is an example of our failed states today. Now, as the brother mentioned, what happened initially is that the Muslims conquered Egypt in about, I think, 3 years. It wasn't long. But when they tried to take the Nubian states, the Christian states in the south, it was actually very difficult. And they found that they were extremely good warriors. In fact, they were known to be very good archers. So they did come up with an agreement under the time of Abdullah ibn Sa'd, which was called the Bakht Agreement, which I'll talk about. But he did something really amazing, actually. He built some of the first effective Muslim navies. So they fought in the Battle of the Mosques, and they also fought the Battle of Alexandria, where they actually were able to repel the Byzantines in 652. But as they found that the response of the Nubians was so strong, they decided to enter into an agreement called the Bakht Treaty. Actually, it served the Muslims in many ways. One of the things is it guaranteed the ability for Muslims to travel to Sudan, or modern-day Sudan now. They were able to do trade, and in fact, one of the conditions of the agreement was that they could build a masjid in the city called Dongola. So this was part of the agreement, and also there was trade between them, and Muslims would eventually travel there, get married there, trade there, and with time, the presence of Islam grew significantly. So there's a famous muhaddith and scholar, his name is Yazid ibn Abi Habib, and he was actually of a Nubian background, and he lived in Egypt, and he was seen as someone of great knowledge, and there were many like him. He was a tabi', and he actually narrated many ahadith. So there's a rich history that we can see within Egypt and also later in Sudan. In terms of one of the first, I would say, powerful states, or really where you could say the Muslims became the majority, was the Funj Sultanate. And this actually lasted for over 300 years. So this is an example where Muslims actually were in authority at this point in time. And does anyone know who this man is? I've given some clues on that. So his name is Ali, Sultan Ali Dinar, yeah? He was the emir of the Darfur Sultanate. And actually he had an interesting life because he fought the British colonization. So the Ottomans actually backed him and supported him, and he tried to resist that occupation. The occupation started from the late 1800s, but actually they fought all the way until when he was killed, I believe, in 1915 or so. So actually it continued for a long time, the resistance against British occupation within Sudan. Now, does anyone know this man?
William?
Yeah.
William, founder of the Masjid in Liverpool, right?
Correct. And also known as Sheikh al-Islam of the British Isles. Does anyone know that was his name? Yeah, he was given that by Sultan Abdul Hamid II, and was seen as his representative in Britain. Really an amazing man. By the way, I've read his book. It's a really fascinating book, because what he did during his time in Liverpool was like a super dawah carrier. Like thousands of people, at least 1,000 people became Muslim, and due to his work. And he also had like a regular magazine called The Crescent. He used to engage with people. He used to have debates. So he was a real advocate, a real ambassador for Islam. And he did something amazing actually in 1896. And I'm just going to read you, the whole fatwa that he wrote. So he said, in the name of Allah, the most compassionate, most merciful, peace be to all true believers to whom this shall come. Know ye, O Muslims, that the British government has decided to commence military and warlike operations against the Muslims of the Sudan, who have taken up arms to defend their country and their faith. And it is in contemplation to employ Muslim soldiers to fight against these Muslims of the Sudan. For any true believer to take up arms and fight against another Muslim is contrary to the Sharia. and against the law of God and his holy prophet. I warn every true believer that if he gives even the slightest assistance in his projected expedition against the Muslims of the Sudan, even to the extent of carrying a parcel or giving a bite of bread to eat or drink, or a drink of water to any person taking part in the expedition against these Muslims, that he thereby helps he uses the word riyor, I think it must be kafir, against the Muslim, and his name will be unworthy to continue upon the roll of the faithful. Signed at the Mosque of Liverpool, England, in the 10th of Shawwal, 1313, which Christians erroneously in their ignorance called the 24th day of March, 1896. Signed W.H. Abdullah William, Sheikh al-Islam of the British Isles. I thought, wow, we're talking about Sudan now in Britain. This man, as almost like a solitary voice, 130 years ago, is giving fatwa to say you cannot abandon your Muslim brothers. You cannot join an expedition to fight against them because of any worldly gain of wage or benefits. I thought, what an inspiration, subhanAllah. And actually, I was reflecting as all the brothers were speaking about nationalism and about unity. I think sometimes we're not very honest with ourselves. If I'm going to be very blunt. We talk about it from afar, this issue of unity and this issue of, there is no difference between us. But actually, what really happens is when the conflict takes place, that's when you're tested. That's when you're tested about your real belief of, oh no, we're all united as Muslims. And I'll give you an example, this whole issue about Somaliland. Some people said it's better for us to praise the Israelis for recognizing us because our homeland has now been recognized by a state. Isn't it? We saw many people celebrating on the streets of Hargeisa in Somaliland. But yet, we saw many, what they call landers, people from Somaliland, who came out to speak out against it. This is the time when you will be adding value. Not when we're all sitting in the masjid together and we're all happy, Arab, Bangladeshi, African, and we're like, oh, alhamdulillah. But what happens when there's a conflict? What happens when there's an issue between Pakistan and Bangladesh? Between India and Pakistan? Between Jordan and Palestine? Between Sudan and Egypt? That's when you get tested. And if you stand on the wrong side then how are you helping the cause of Islam? Tell me. Then you're just saying it's a lovely ayah that says we should be united. And the proof of that is at the time of the Prophet ﷺ. There was a very famous incident that happened during his time, when one of the Aus and Khazraj one of the Ansar and Muhajirin nearly came to blows. So the Ansar being the ones who supported the Prophet ﷺ in Medina, and the Muhajirin who came from Mecca. And they nearly came to blows. But what was really interesting is what they did. They called upon their people. They said, oh Ansar, and the other one said, oh Muhajir, come basically, we're going to have a scuffle here. And what did the Prophet ﷺ do? He said, will you do this even when I'm still amongst you? Are you going to go back to these concepts of tribalism, and I'm from this town, and I've got this colour, and I speak this way? You're going to go back to this way of division, even when I'm with you? And he said something really important. He says, advise your brother or assist your brother, whether he's the oppressed or the oppressor. And the Muslims knew very well what he meant when you're being the oppressed. If you're being oppressed, you help the person being oppressed. But what do you do when someone's being the oppressor? You restrain his hand, you correct him, you remind him that he shouldn't fall into this act of dhulm, this oppression. So it's a really important lesson. Now, if you looked at those maps in Wadi Sham and Iraq, what do you see here? The same, right? Nice clear line between Egypt and Libya and Sudan. And even Chad is like nicely done. So they've made sure that each of these lands is designated to be, for this nationality. I'm a Sudani, I'm a Libi, I'm an Egyptian, and everyone then takes pride in that nationality. So these fault lines that they've left for us are to keep us disunited. Now, as the brother mentioned, there's something called the Quad, and the Quad is made up of the Emirates, the US, Saudi, and Egypt. It used to be the UK as well. And subhanAllah, when we think about, especially in these last couple of years, the role that unfortunately the UAE as a government, as a regime, has had in the disunity of the Muslims is quite unbelievable. Because we know in the situation in Palestine, they have been allies of the Israeli occupation. In fact, Etihad Airlines, I think yesterday or the day before, announced that they will have the most number of flights to any city is Tel Aviv. It will be something like 6 daily flights. Imagine during this time of the genocide, while even Western airlines are trying to reduce the amount of flights, these guys are increasing the number of flights. And we know the role they played in Yemen and the role they played in Sudan. But so this is not about coming to the table as Muslim brothers trying to help. They're unfortunately instigating the problems because they have their own self-interest in this region. And Britain, interestingly, they came out with a statement saying the warring parties must end the bloodshed in Sudan. This was recently. But if anyone has followed the news events, Britain actually supplies weapons via the UAE that end up being used in Sudan. So imagine one statement, a statement that they make openly, but in reality they facilitated the sale of arms to assist in the civil war there. Does anyone know what the ratio of debt to GDP, that Sudan had prior to the civil war as a percentage? Anyone? I just want some guesses.
10%.
Higher. To say higher is like higher.
70%?
Higher.
Or 90%?
Higher.
100%?
Higher.
Or
180% of GDP in Sudan before the war was debt. Just how can you even as a country prosper? This is a country that's rich in resources. By the way, when I say rich, they are extremely rich. Gold, oil, other minerals. They used to be considered the breadbasket of Africa, i.e. amazing agricultural land like Darfur. But yet they landed up with 180% of debt. And now after, 270%, and some estimates went as far as 344% now during the civil war. How can a country ever come out of the economic crisis with this level of debt that sits over them? And these are organizations like the IMF and the World Bank that crippled economies with this debt. And countries that used to be free of all of these problems, countries that used to be exporting their wealth. You know, brothers, when you see the term Free Sudan, Free Palestine, what comes into your mind? I want to ask a question. What comes into your mind? What does that statement mean to you?
Essentially, a Western statement doesn't really have linguistically, it doesn't have a link to Islam.
Yeah.
It's like if a friend is in prison, people say free this guy, free that guy. For me personally, it doesn't mean horror, it doesn't mean bring back Sharia, it's just a westernized linguistic statement.
Yeah.
It doesn't have no correlation to what the country or the ummah actually means.
Yeah. So it's basically rhetorical, like rhetoric almost. Yeah. So what do you see as it? What should it mean for us as Muslims when we're saying these words? If we are saying the words like, Free Palestine, Whole Palestine, whatever it might be.
So I just want to add, we know, for example, we shouldn't really be, the division that you mentioned in the map, obviously when you say Free Sudan, is that good map, we want to free that one.
Yeah.
But what about the rest? Why are we divided in the first place? So free could also mean we're consolidating the concept of being divided
Nation
in the
state.
first place.
Yeah.
But really also, I just wanted to add something. The reason why we say free is because we know we're not free. As states, we're really not free. When we say Free Palestine, we're not free. There is somebody who's actually having some kind of level of control, whether we're being subjugated to it, like in Palestine with the Zionist state, whether we've been subjugated to it by leaders who are being put upon us, who have no interest for our welfare at all. So sometimes, subhanAllah, I know we say free, and all of a sudden it just conjures up the image that we're still divided.
Yeah.
But it just shows you how we're not actually free in our decision, in the way we are actually able to and maybe that leads to unity as well. If we were free, the Ummah would be more than happy to break down the barriers if they were free to do so in the first place.
Yeah. Anyone else? Jazakallah khair.
Personally, for me, I would say it's quite subjective in terms of when people ask what you mean by free. I wouldn't really say free the country itself, but for me, like the concept will be is free the Ummah from the oppression and the colonial shackles that we have been tied down to, and the so-called corrupt leaders that we have in place as well. So for me, this is what it means when I use the term free.
Yeah.
But when I look at today's demonstration and I see people saying free Palestine and
Yeah.
so on, right? They don't mean this. For them, it's just free from killing, oppression, and so on. But then what's after that? They haven't really gone beyond that. It's just you go back to that same capitalist, secular sort of society.
Yeah.
So it is quite different, personally, from the way I understand it.
Jazakallah khair. Any others?
I'll say in a nutshell, the people should have the ability to decide their government, how they rule over the land. And of course, in our case, Muslims, we should live and thinking our governments according to Islam.
Yeah.
So that's what I would say for me, free. We have the power to decide how we rule our lands, not foreign intervention. And like you said in Sudan, where it's constructed, where players being funded by external players to construct this current crisis.
Any others before I move on? Anyone like to add their views on this?
So,
Salam.
some people say that Sudan's in the situation it's in because people there are just constantly fighting each other, so it's their responsibility to sort it out.
Yeah.
I.e. the Sudanese people are in a constant state of civil war because they're still something. It's their problem basically,
Yeah.
they should sort it out.
Yeah.
And yeah, what do you have to say about that?
I'd say that you're absolutely right in terms of they should be able to sort it out, but no one letting them sort it out. The whole reason of these quad, these 4 countries, they meet intentionally to make sure that these problems continue. So we know that Emirates has a big role in funding and supplying weapons to the RSF. So how are they going to be able to sort their problems out if someone from an external source that has, bad intentions for this country, for these people, they're not going to be able to solve their problem. So it's like when the US says we're a peaceful broker, we're an independent and neutral broker, like Gaza. We know they're not, and they're not in Sudan either. So the intentions are not to actually solve these problems. So Sudan, for example, before South Sudan broke away, it was actually the biggest geographic country in Africa. And most of the oil resources was actually in the south. So now you've automatically weakened Sudan as a country. Then on top of that, you've got places like Darfur, which are considered really, in terms of agricultural land and other resources, very rich. Again, they want to talk about splitting Darfur as a separate state. So how can you ever move forward when you're being forced into these situations where conflict, occurs in these countries? So they're being instigated. People like Hameti and Orhan, they're not independent. They're actually being funded and supported by external players. This is the problem that we have. And that's across the Muslim world, that's not just in Sudan. So actually, I think this whole point of, how do we free ourselves? We do need to ask those questions, isn't it? We're not here to just say that we want to free ourselves in a very tokenistic way. But what do you want to move forward to? Do you want to be free in the same way that Jordan is free, where it's got American bases, and it can't say a word against the American administration? Or do you want to be free like Egypt, which is riddled with debt and has such a weak currency? Or do you want to be free like Libya, which is going through internal conflict? Or do you want to be free like Somalia, which is split into different areas? What do we even mean by free? So I think this is the question I was trying to provoke. The whole idea of freedom means that you take control of your own destiny as a Muslim. You have authority for yourselves. You decide. When the Prophet ﷺ established a state in Medina, he wanted to be truly free from all of those other external players, all these other authorities.
Yeah, so do you think that's a desperation for the UAE because they're not going to get gold, they're going to go down?
Yeah.
The economy is going to go down, that's why they need to be desperate, that's why they invaded Sudan.
Yeah, so I think there might be some economic benefits, but I think there's actually something that I wanted to share with you, a really interesting quote from a former Sudanese ambassador to the US. His name is Khidr Haroun. And he said, Egypt, the UAE and Saudi Arabia agree to various extents on the need for the Islamists to be distanced from power in Sudan after the war is over, which is a stance shared by the US and Israel. Isn't that interesting? So the Quad and the 3 Muslim members of the Quad agree with the master of the Quad and the oppressor of Gaza that we don't want Islam in Sudan. That's really what it's all about. It's nothing to do with gold. We've actually accepted the Western narrative that this is about gold and the UAE's quest for gold. That might be a side benefit. But UAE is not acting independently. UAE has a mission to attack Islam across the Middle East. That's why they support Sisi, for example, against any kind of Islamic revival in Egypt. So I think we need to ask the deeper question: how do you gain authority of your land? This is what they realize. Islam is the key to regaining authority, because Islam demands that you rule independently, that you don't rely on foreign powers, that you rule by Islam, that you look after the resources of the country and ensure that it doesn't fall into the hands of a few elite members of society. This is what Islam does. So Islam is a threat to that system.
So,
Yeah.
Omer,
Yeah.
I was going to say is, what we're naive about is that these terms are political terms, and they are given in a an international political context.
Yeah.
When you use the word free, it's in a contextual, it's not neutral.
Of course.
So when Muslims use these terms, why are they using these terms? Because they have a certain currency in the Western political concepts,
Yeah.
freedom. So it's not
Very
neutral,
true.
it's contextual.
Yeah.
So we don't see Muslims, so what that is when Muslims are using the word Free Sudan, it plays into the media, global, international, what they say international community, is like a signal, come and interfere here, free us, i.e. come in and occupy us.
Yeah.
So even Muslims are not careful when a lot of the terms that are used for Palestine are very similarly Western political concepts. What the Ummah needs to do, I think, is use Islamic terms and appeal directly to the Ummah, not to the Western media, not to the Western nations.
Yeah.
So we don't see Islamic terms being used in these liberations. The closest we saw was during the Arab Spring, when it was close to some kind of Islamic call. Not exactly,
Yeah.
but close to it. But now it's gone back to using these terms. Free was linked to the liberal philosophy, and it's like green light, come and interfere in our country. We need liberating. We need you to free us. Who are you asking to free you?
Yeah.
You see, if you're calling for Muslims to free you, you will use some Islamic term. You use a hadith or something linked back to your aqidah. But they're not using, when we don't use these Islamic terms, you're appealing to who then? The Kafirs.
Yeah.
So I think the terms are loaded. Terms are loaded. They carry a lot of things. You know, I was sitting at a dinner the other night, Muslim family dinner, and they're discussing the situation in Bangladesh. Not Bangladesh here. Elections might be coming up, and you know they're debating on the table. Should we stay in the Western camp? Should we, you know, let the Jamaat, the Islamics, come through? You know, there's a debate. Some people are saying no. You know, we shouldn't let we don't want the extremists to come through.
Yeah.
Maybe we should stay in the Western camp. This is the political ideas we have are all from, like you've been talking,
Yeah. I mean,
colonized
I
times.
had a similar discussion actually about Bangladeshi politics the other day, and it's interesting how India is seen as a real threat, but then they're not realizing that the West is a greater threat. But no, okay, but we can move closer to a Western solution. What do you think the West has done in the Muslim world? It has not come to bless us. It's come to whatever to find favourable deals, whether it's military, strategic, economy. You know, so I think that's an important point. In terms of the path forward, brothers, what would you say the path forward is? How do we move forward from here?
Can I ask a question instead of
Of course.
so it's of course as the Ummah, the solution is that we have a Khilafah that restores the honor, the dignity, the way forward for us to restore protection of life and so on, right? This is what we all want. But the one thing that's kind of been questioned in my mind of lately is that when we look at the Ummah as a large, like when the Prophet ﷺ mentioned that you as a Ummah, there'll be many of you, but you'll be as the foam of the sea.
Yeah.
And this is referring to, the foam of the sea is referring to toxic waste, in a sense, right? As an Ummah, are we actually really ready to move to that next path of towards re-establishing the Khilafah? Because we have been injected with this viral disease of materialism, nationalism, many of these sort of Western traits and so on. Even when we actually kind of look at there's another hadith that even comes to mind on the difference between a kafir and a Muslim is his salah. The majority of us are not even praying our salah.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that they are disbelievers, but this is kind of what it seems like. So if we did work forward towards the establishment of Khilafah, how likely is it that it's just going to end up flipping over again?
Yeah, so it's a good question. I think the thing to remember is we are obligated to do something in this scenario, right? Islam has solutions for all scenarios. So when we see the fragmentation of the ummah, the lack of independence as an ummah in terms of leadership, there's a solution that Islam gives. So that's clearly something that we need to keep in mind. Now, we can bring people sometimes bring in these discussions like, so the Muslims will not even pray. So why are you talking about politics? Well, you know, I could answer that from a hadith where the Prophet ﷺ said that the knots of Islam will be undone one by one. The first figure will be ruling and the last figure will be salah. So actually, ruling is a fundamental part of how you maintain Islam in society, actually. Because even zakat and even looking after the welfare of people, with all due respect to my brothers in the charity, the states are failing in that responsibility. That's why they have to rise to that challenge. Because no one is actually undertaking that duty to look after the affairs of the people. So I would take the question back a little bit. What role do we have to play? Because you're not responsible for whether a khilaf is established and we solve the problem of disunity, but you're responsible for your stances. You're responsible for your stances in an individual capacity, as a community, as an ummah overall. My point is, are we asking ourselves what role we're playing? Are we on the field or are we spectators? That's the question I would ask. So I did a video about the Somaliland thing, and I got a few videos from brothers and sisters from Somaliland who addressed this issue. They responded to the call of Amr bil Ma'ruf wa Nahy anil Munkar. They responded to the commanding the good and forbidding the evil. They're not here to just say Islam believes in unity. Islam believes Somalia and Somaliland should not be disunited. No, they rose to the challenge. They made the video, they spread the word, they went on the street, they challenged it. That's how we should look at this problem now. We see a problem in Sudan, we see a problem in Palestine, we see disunity, we see our resources in the hands of foreign companies. What do we do about it? Do we have a stance or are we absent? That's my point. We should have a stance. We should be on the field and not spectators in this scenario. Not that we will bring back the glory of Islam or not, it may never come in our time. But the point is, do you have a stance as a Muslim and are you acting according to what Islam demands of you?
So, way forward, I'll put forward, as I was saying earlier, Gaza have shown us that you don't need the establishment media and the establishment trying to control the narrative broke down because humans are appealing to humans across the world.
Yeah.
So the people of Gaza are posting what's happening to them, their slaughter, and people around the world are responding to that. So it's people's independent action that has kept Gaza the thing that is in the world, and obviously Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Yeah.
So I think here as well, like Sudan, if the global media is turned off and the global political media is turned off Sudan, it doesn't mean we're powerless not to make a noise about it.
Exactly.
That's one suggestion, that
Yeah.
we should. Gaza's changed the way people think about making an issue an issue. Because we're waiting for maybe the mosque to tell us about Sudan. This mosque has, but most of them haven't. Like the brother's saying, no one's talking about it. But we have the power now, that everyone has the power in their hand to create a noise about issues. So I think that's one thing
No,
we should think differently about.
that's a very powerful point. In fact, I've given this exact example so many times. When I say, what is our role? I said, what has our role already been? Because had we not responded as a collective movement in the aftermath of 7th October, when the whole genocide rhetoric was in full swing, where would we be now? If it wasn't for every tweet and every video and every post and every share, where would we be now? And this is what's really interesting. People underestimate their agency, their control in this. Because they say, what can one person do? I mean, I'm sure a lot of people have seen that viral clip or viral statement. You know, I'm only one person said 2 billion Muslims, yeah? That is the reality. You're one person, a part of a collective. And it reminds me of a really good question a sister asked in a talk I gave. And she goes, I'm quite old, she's like an auntie. And she goes, all I can do is like, share and post on my stories. I said, sister, if you don't like, share and post on your stories, where's my post gonna go? It only gets carried because someone decides to pass it on and like it and share it and put it on their story. So actually we do have more agency than we like to make it out. And I'll give you a perfect example. I'll go to this. These were two demonstrations 1 week apart in London for Sudan. Can you tell me how many people look like they're not Sudanese there? Just being blunt, based on you know the language, based on the colour, how many people do you think are not Sudanese? Hardly anyone. That's the reality. We don't turn up for them. And this was another one as well. But subhanAllah, I know one video that was done in that demonstration that went viral by a non-Sudanese person. And it was exactly what you said. They used an opportunity to spread that message. And that was maybe viewed 30, 40, 50,000 times. And it got you know, into many people's, you know, they started discussing why are Muslims not talking about Sudan from one person's action. So definitely I think we underestimate the role we play as part of a collective, as an Omer. And that's something that we should be, you know, willing to, you know, challenge ourselves. Are we doing enough individually? Have I thought what social media channels I can use? Have I gone and spoken to the imam? Have I tried to do a local talk? Have I tried to arrange a dinner to discuss this? Have I done any of those actions? Have I tried to go to a protest? Have I given charity? No. So what role did you play actually then? Just want to go back to that slide before, sorry. It was, you know, this was a headline actually just recently, and it was saying about once Africa's breadbasket, Sudan faces a hunger crisis, and this is well known about Sudan being a breadbasket of Africa. I thought, subhanAllah, so it's not the lack of our resources, because we know that they were an agricultural powerhouse. They have gold, they have oil. In fact, my dad went to university with one of the first ministers of oil ministers of Sudan. So this is when it was just coming out of independence or out colonization. So it shows you they have huge resource. But it's those points that we talked about, not having control of your own economy, not being actually referring back to your deen in terms of how you look after the affairs of your people. Think about even the concept of zakah and waqf, the waqf being like institutions that will generate income and help people come out of poverty, whether it's hospitals or masajid or other places that can benefit the people. These are concepts of Islam embedded within the Ummah, but obviously we've completely moved away from them. And I just wanted to finish, brothers, on a last point. And this is really that we are going through a really difficult period as an Ummah. There's no doubt about it. Whether it's what we said in Palestine, East Pakistan, Kashmir, the Rohingya Muslims, Sudan, and elsewhere, Syria. We have to remember, subhanAllah, these things change. You know, these situations can change from a situation of despair to a situation where actually Muslims have relief. And this was an image of the US troops leaving Afghanistan after, 20 years of occupation, after how much destruction that they caused. They still did not have the upper hand. And this is a message for all of us. The Prophet ﷺ's mission himself, 13 years in Mecca, and then 10 years in Medina. And it was only in the last few years, and it was only really at the time of Omer Khattab that they had real strength in the Muslim world. So I think that's a lesson that we should never forget. We are going through a very difficult phase. So no doubt we feel sometimes a level of despair. But when you look back and you see you know, these events, I think that should give us a reminder really. And we know that there's an ayah that specifically talks about this, that you know, you'll see that the authority or the power changes from time to time. Yeah, that we will, you know, change who has authority from time to time. And it's a reminder for us that you won't always be in ascendancy. Sometimes you will be under the foot of an occupier. But actually, it's what you do that you're accounted for, not whether you actually change that reality. I think I just wanted to finish on that. Jazakumullah khair.